A young woman stands on a raised platform. The rough-hewn wood a stark reminder of the auction blocks used for livestock. Her name is Alara Hale, and the air in the dusty town hall is thick with the scent of cheap whiskey, sweat, and judgment. Before her sits a panel of stern-faced town elders and one man who commands the room's attention without saying a word. He is Silas Blackwood, a name synonymous with wealth, land, and sorrow. He is ancient, his face a roadmap of hard years. His hands, though spotted with age, rest calmly on a silver-headed cane. He is buying a bride, and she is the last one on offer. The auctioneer, a portly man with a booming voice, has just finished listing her meager qualifications: strong, healthy, and, most importantly, desperate. She is an orphan with no connections, a ward of the county sold to settle her deceased parents' debts. A transaction of flesh and bone. Silas Blackwood simply watches her, his eyes a pale, piercing blue that seem to see right through the fear she's trying so hard to conceal. He's not looking at her with the leering gaze of the other men. It's an assessment, cold and methodical, like a rancher judging horse flesh. They faced harsh judgment, but someone saw their true value. Before this story unfolds, tell us, have you ever stood up for someone unfairly judged? If you believe in looking beyond the surface, hit like and subscribe. The price is settled with a quiet nod from Blackwood, a sum that makes the crowd murmur. It's enough to clear the ledgers, and then some. It is, for a girl with nothing, a fortune. For Silas Blackwood, it is pocket change. The gavel falls with a crack that sounds like a final judgment, and a piece of paper is slid across the table. Her life, signed away. As Silas rises slowly, leaning heavily on his cane, a tremor of pure, cold terror runs through Alara. She is now the property of a rich, old man, destined for a gilded cage on his vast, isolated ranch. He approaches the platform, his gaze unwavering, and for the first time, she understands the profound, terrifying loneliness of her position. He wasn't just buying a bride. He was buying her future, her body, her very will. And with two quiet words to the auctioneer, settle it, his life, and hers, were irrevocably changed. The journey to the Blackwood Ranch was a silent one. Alara sat opposite the old man in a well-sprung carriage that felt entirely alien after a lifetime of hard benches and dusty wagons. The landscape shifted from the huddled, judgmental buildings of the town of Redemption to sprawling plains of gold and green, stretching out to a horizon bruised purple by the coming twilight. Silas Blackwood did not speak. He merely watched the land pass by, his expression unreadable, a deep, rattling cough occasionally shaking his frail frame. Alara's mind raced. She had heard the whispers about him. A recluse. A man who had lost his only son and daughter-in-law a year prior in a tragic accident. A king ruling over a lonely, empty empire. She steeled herself for what was to come, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. She would be strong. She would endure. She had survived starvation and orphanage matrons. She could survive being the wife of a dying old man. It was a trade, her freedom for his name and his roof. The Blackwood house was not just a house. It was a fortress of stone and dark timber perched on a rise overlooking the entire valley. It was magnificent and deeply melancholic, a place built for a dynasty that no longer existed. A severe-looking housekeeper named Mrs. Gable met them at the door, her lips a thin, disapproving line. She looked Alara up and down, her gaze lingering on the worn fabric of her dress, and sniffed. "This is Miss Hale," Silas said, his voice raspy. "She will be staying here. Show her to the East Wing." The East Wing, not his chambers. Alara's confusion was a flicker of light in the darkness of her fear. Mrs. Gable led her through halls that echoed with their footsteps. Polished wood gleamed in the lamplight, and portraits of stern-faced Blackwoods from generations past watched her with accusing eyes. The room she was given was larger than any she had ever slept in, with a four-poster bed and windows that looked out onto the endless plains. It was a beautiful prison cell. "Mr. Blackwood takes his supper at 7. You will be expected to join him," Mrs. Gable stated, her tone leaving no room for argument, before she turned and left, closing the door with a soft but definitive click. Left alone, Alara walked to the window. The sun was setting, bleeding orange and red across the sky. The sheer scale of the land, of her isolation, pressed in on her. This was her new life. A quiet, opulent servitude. She wondered how long the old man would live, and what would become of her when he was gone. Would she be cast out? Or would she inherit this vast, empty world? That evening at supper, the source of the house's profound silence was revealed. Seated at the long, imposing dining table across from Silas was a small girl, no older than 7. She had hair the color of spun corn silk and eyes the same startling blue as her grandfather's. She was a miniature ghost, pushing a piece of potato around her plate with a silver fork, her gaze fixed on the pristine white tablecloth. She didn't look up, not once. "This is my granddaughter, Lily," Silas said, his voice softer than Alara had yet heard it. "Lily, this is Miss Hale." The girl gave no sign of having heard. Alara offered a small, hesitant smile that went unseen. The meal was an excruciating affair, punctuated only by the clinking of cutlery and Silas's recurring, chest-deep cough. Alara, who had known true hunger, found she had no appetite. She was not a bride. She was not even a companion for the old man. She was a stranger at a table of ghosts, an unwelcome audience to a private grief. Later that night, unable to sleep in the cavernous bed, Alara heard a sound. A small, muffled sob, coming from down the hall. Driven by an instinct she didn't know she possessed, she crept out of her room and followed the sound to a slightly ajar door. Peeking inside, she saw Lily curled in her bed, her small shoulders shaking. A nightmare. Without thinking, Alara slipped into the room. She didn't touch the girl. She just sat on the edge of the bed and began to hum. A simple, tuneless melody her own mother had hummed to her long ago. Slowly, the sobbing subsided. The girl's breathing evened out. Alara stayed until she was certain Lily was soundly asleep, then quietly slipped back to her own room. From the deep shadows at the end of the hall, Silas Blackwood watched her go. He hadn't been checking on Lily. He had been watching Alara. He leaned against the wall, a single, silent nod his only reaction, before he turned and retreated to his own chambers, a flicker of something that might have been validation in his tired eyes. The next morning, he said nothing of the incident. Instead, after a tense breakfast, he led Alara to a stable that was cleaner than any home she'd ever lived in. "Lily's pony, Patches, needs grooming," he stated, pointing to a gentle-eyed Shetland. "The stable hand is busy with the fences today. See to it." It was a test. He wasn't asking for a wife's duties. He was giving her a chore. Alara, who had grown up around farm animals, felt a sense of relief. This, at least, she understood. She spent the morning brushing the pony's coat until it shone, her movements calm and sure. After a while, she sensed a presence and turned to see Lily standing in the stable doorway, watching her with wide, solemn eyes. Alara didn't speak. She just continued her work, humming the same soft tune from the night before. Lily didn't move, but she didn't run away either. For the first time, Alara felt that perhaps she wasn't in a prison, but a place of profound and complicated sorrow. And she was beginning to suspect that Silas Blackwood hadn't bought a bride at all. He had bought something else entirely, and she had no idea what it was. Days bled into weeks. Life at the Blackwood Ranch settled into a strange, quiet rhythm. Alara was given tasks, not orders. She was asked to mend a tear in one of Lily's dresses, to read from a book of fairy tales in the parlor in the evenings, to tend the small vegetable garden near the kitchen. Silas watched her, always from a distance, his silence a heavy blanket over the house. He was observing, measuring, waiting. Alara's focus shifted from her own survival to the small, silent girl who trailed her like a shadow. Lily still didn't speak, but she was a constant presence. When Alara worked in the garden, Lily would sit on the stone wall, clutching a worn rag doll. When Alara read aloud, Lily would curl up in a large armchair just outside the circle of lamplight, listening. A breakthrough came one afternoon in the kitchen. Alara, finding a store of flour and yeast, decided to bake bread. The simple, domestic act was a comfort, a connection to a life before the orphanage, before the auction block. The smell of rising dough and baking bread filled the sterile house with a warmth it had long been missing. As she pulled the golden brown loaves from the oven, she turned to find Lily standing right beside her, her small nose twitching. The girl pointed a tentative finger at a loaf. "Hot," Alara said softly, smiling. She cut a small piece from the end, blew on it until it was cool, and held it out. Lily hesitated for a long moment, her blue eyes darting from the bread to Alara's face, then back again. Finally, she took it. She ate it slowly, deliberately, as if committing the taste to memory. Their silent companionship grew. Alara learned that Lily loved the scent of lavender, that she was afraid of thunderstorms, and that she knew how to move through the world with an unnerving quietness. Alara, in turn, began to feel the tight knot of fear in her own chest slowly loosen. She was not being treated as a wife. She wasn't being mistreated at all. She was a caretaker, a companion, a presence meant to fill a void. The outside world intruded one crisp autumn afternoon in the form of a polished black buggy and a man in a tailored city suit. He was handsome, with a charming smile that didn't reach his eyes. Silas introduced him as Marcus Thorne, a distant cousin. "Just checking in on my favorite uncle," Thorne said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. He clapped Silas on the back with a familiarity that seemed forced. His gaze swept over the room and landed on Alara, dismissing her instantly as hired help. Then he saw Lily, who had instinctively moved to stand behind Alara's skirts. "And there's the little princess," he boomed, producing a fancy porcelain doll from a box. "A gift for you, my dear." Lily shrank further away. Thorne's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He placed the doll on a nearby table, his movements stiff. He spent the next hour talking to Silas about finances, land deeds, and water rights, his words a veiled attempt to gauge the old man's health and the state of his affairs. Alara, watching from the corner of the room, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. This man was a vulture, circling. When he finally left, Silas stared at the closed door for a long time, his breathing labored. He looked older, more fragile than ever. That night, a storm rolled in, a furious, violent squall that rattled the window panes and lit the sky with jagged flashes of lightning. A deafening clap of thunder shook the house, and a moment later, Alara heard a terrified scream from Lily's room. She rushed in to find the little girl sitting bolt upright in bed, trembling, her eyes wide with terror. Alara didn't hesitate. She sat on the bed and gathered the small, shaking body into her arms. Lily didn't resist. She buried her face in Alara's shoulder and clung to her as the storm raged outside. "It's all right," Alara whispered, rocking her gently. "It's just noise. I'm here. You're safe." She held her for what felt like hours, murmuring assurances, until the storm passed and Lily's trembling subsided into the steady rhythm of sleep. As Alara gently laid her back against the pillows, a tiny voice whispered in the dark. "Sing." Alara froze. It was the first word she had ever heard Lily speak. Her heart ached with a sudden, fierce protectiveness. She sat beside the bed, took Lily's small hand in hers, and began to sing a soft, simple lullaby. She sang until her own voice grew hoarse, long after the girl was asleep. When she finally rose to leave, she saw Silas standing in the doorway. He was leaning against the frame, his face etched with a profound weariness, but his eyes were clear. He had seen it all. He simply nodded at her, a gesture of deep, unspoken meaning. In that moment, Alara understood. She wasn't here for him. She was here for Lily. She was a shield, a wall, a guardian. And Marcus Thorne was the storm they needed to survive. The first snow of winter had just begun to dust the high plains when Silas's strength finally gave out. The doctor from Redemption came and went, his expression grim, leaving behind bottles of laudanum and a heavy silence. Silas summoned Alara to his study, a room filled with the scent of old paper, leather, and impending mortality. His lawyer, a dry, pragmatic man named Abernathy, was already there, his face set in professional solemnity. Silas was propped up in a large leather chair near the fire, a thick blanket over his legs. His breathing was a shallow, painful rasp, but his eyes had lost none of their intensity. He gestured for Alara to sit. "The charade is over, Miss Hale," he began, his voice barely a whisper. "It's time you knew the truth of our arrangement." Alara sat, her hands folded in her lap, and listened. Silas told her everything. He confirmed his illness was terminal. The lung fever would take him before spring. He spoke of his son, Thomas, and his wife, Eleanor, Lily's parents. They had been the life of the ranch, the future he had built everything for. Their death in the carriage accident a year ago hadn't just broken his heart, it had shattered his legacy. That left Lily, he rasped, pausing to fight for breath. And it left Marcus Thorne. He explained that Thorne, as his nearest male relative, was legally positioned to claim guardianship of Lily, and by extension, control of the Blackwood fortune. The man is a snake, Silas said, a spark of the old fire in his eyes. He sees Lily not as a niece, but as a key to this house, this land, everything I've built. He would ship her off to the harshest Eastern boarding school he could find and plunder the estate until there was nothing left. Abernathy cleared his throat. We explored all legal avenues, Miss Hale. Without a direct family member to appoint, any petition for guardianship from Mr. Thorne would likely be approved by the courts. So I needed a new family member, Silas finished, his gaze locking with Alara's. I couldn't just hire a governess. Thorne could have her dismissed, bought off, or intimidated. I needed someone with an unassailable legal right. A wife. Alara stared at him, the pieces clicking into place with dizzying speed. The auction. The price. The public nature of the transaction. It wasn't a purchase of a bride. It was the creation of a legal fiction. I didn't have time to court a respectable woman from a good family, Silas continued, a grim irony in his tone. And any such woman would have her own family, her own interests. I watched you on that platform in Redemption. I saw the other girls, the ones who preened or wept. You did neither. You stood straight, and you looked the world in the eye. I didn't see desperation in you, Miss Hale. I saw defiance. I saw strength. I gambled that you had kindness, too. He had been testing her all along. The chores, the quiet observation, giving her the space to connect with Lily on her own terms. He wasn't buying a wife for himself. He was buying a mother for his granddaughter. The document you signed was not a marriage certificate, Abernathy interjected, sliding a thick sheaf of papers across the desk. It is a contract of guardianship. It names you as Lily's legal guardian upon Mr. Blackwood's death, with myself as executor. You will have full control of the estate, held in trust for Lily until she comes of age. The marriage was a public performance to solidify your position and make it unimpeachable. Alara's head swam. The weight of his plan, of his trust in her, a complete stranger, was staggering. He had wagered his entire legacy, his granddaughter's entire future, on a gut feeling he'd had while watching her on an auction block. I am not asking you to love the child as your own, Silas said, his voice fading. I am asking you to protect her, to raise her here, on this land that is her birthright, to be the shield I can no longer be. The funds are more than adequate. You will want for nothing. He paused, a terrible, rattling cough seizing him. When it passed, he looked utterly spent. But I must ask you, now that you know the truth, will you accept this? Will you be her guardian? Alara looked from Silas's tired, pleading face to the legal documents on the desk. She thought of Lily's small hand in hers during the thunderstorm, of her first whispered word, of the way she now followed her everywhere, a silent, trusting shadow. The fear she had felt on the auction block was a distant memory, replaced by a fierce, powerful love for the little girl who had lost everything. This wasn't a burden. It was a purpose. She looked Silas Blackwood directly in the eye. Yes, she said, her voice clear and steady. I will. A long, slow breath escaped the old man's lips, a sound of profound relief. The fight seemed to go out of him, his shoulders slumping as if he had finally laid down a weight too heavy to bear. Thank you, he whispered. The rest, he knew, would be a battle fought by the quiet, resilient young woman he had chosen. Silas Blackwood passed away 2 weeks later, on a morning so still and cold the air seemed to crackle. The funeral was a somber affair attended by the townsfolk of Redemption, who whispered behind their hands and stared at Alara with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Marcus Thorne was there, dressed in expensive black, his face a perfect mask of grief that fooled no one. He stood beside the grave, already looking like he owned it. The true confrontation came the following day, in Mr. Abernathy's cramped, book-lined office in town. Alara sat on one side of the polished mahogany desk, Lily seated quietly beside her, her small hand gripping Alara's tightly. Marcus Thorne sat opposite, flanked by his own lawyer, radiating an aura of smug confidence. He believed this was a formality before he assumed control. Abernathy, his face impassive, broke the seal on Silas's last will and testament and began to read. He detailed minor bequests to the ranch hands and a generous donation to the town church. Thorne shifted impatiently in his chair. Then, Abernathy reached the primary articles concerning the estate and the guardianship of Lily Blackwood. He read the clauses aloud, his voice dry and steady. He outlined the trust established for Lily's benefit, and then he named her legal guardian, endowed with full authority over her person and her inheritance until her 18th birthday, Miss Alara Hale. The silence in the room was absolute for a heartbeat, and then Thorne exploded. "What?" he roared, slamming his hand on the desk. "That is absurd. She's a nobody, a purchased woman." He was a senile old fool, and this whore manipulated him in his dotage. His lawyer tried to restrain him, but Thorne was incandescent with rage. He stood up, his handsome face contorted into a mask of pure ugliness. He pointed a trembling finger at Alara. "You will not get your hands on a single penny of Blackwood money. I will contest this. I'll drag you through every court from here to the capital. I'll have you thrown out on the street where you belong. I am his family. That child is a thorn." Throughout the tirade, Alara remained still. She felt Lily flinch beside her, but she squeezed the small hand in reassurance, her own fear burned away by a cold, protective fury. When Thorne finally paused for breath, she stood up slowly. All eyes in the room turned to her. She was no longer the frightened girl from the auction block. She was the guardian of Lily Blackwood. "You are mistaken, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice quiet but carrying an unshakable authority that filled the small office. "You are not his family. Lily is his family, and I am her protector." Silas knew what was in your heart. He knew you see her as an obstacle and this land as a prize. She took a step forward, her gaze never leaving his. "You speak of money and the courts. I speak of a little girl who has nightmares, who had stopped speaking from grief, and who is just now learning to feel safe again. You will not touch her. You will not frighten her. This is not about the Blackwood fortune. This is about a promise I made to a dying man to protect his granddaughter. And I will keep it." Thorne sneered. "Your promise means nothing. The law will see this for what it is. The law will see this." Abernathy cut in, his voice sharp. He produced another document from his valise. A signed and witnessed affidavit from Mr. Blackwood, dated 2 days before his death, detailing his reasoning for appointing Miss Hale. It includes a full psychological assessment of his own lucidity, signed by Dr. Miller. It also includes his detailed observations of your own character and motives, Mr. Thorne. Thorne's face went pale. He was beaten, legally, thoroughly, and publicly. But the final blow didn't come from a lawyer. It came from the small girl at Alara's side. Lily, who had been silent through the entire ordeal, let go of Alara's hand, stepped forward, and looked directly at the furious man who claimed her as his own. "She's not a whore," Lily said, her child's voice ringing with perfect, devastating clarity. "She's my mother now." The words struck Marcus Thorne like a physical blow. He stared at the girl, then at Alara's defiant face, and he knew he had lost on every conceivable front. Without another word, he turned, shoved his lawyer aside, and stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him. The sound echoed the finality of the gavel that had sold Alara's life, but this time, it was the sound of freedom. The heavy silence that followed is broken only by a soft sigh from Mr. Abernathy. He looks at Alara, a newfound respect dawning in his old eyes, and then at the small, fierce girl standing beside her. Outside, the sounds of the town, a distant hammer, a horse whinnying, filter in, a world that suddenly seems much less threatening. Alara kneels and wraps her arms around Lily, holding her tight. The little girl's defiant declaration hangs in the air, a testament to a bond forged in sorrow and cemented in courage. Their fight is over. Their life is just beginning. They leave the lawyer's office and step out into the pale winter sunlight, 2 figures walking hand in hand, no longer a bought woman and an orphaned child, but a family. The whispers of the townsfolk follow them, but the scorn has been replaced by a grudging awe. Back at the ranch, the vast, lonely house waits, but it no longer feels like a gilded cage or a tomb of memories. It feels like home. Later that evening, Alara sits on the porch swing, a thick quilt wrapped around her and Lily, who is nestled against her side. They watch the stars prick the vast, black canvas of the sky. The landscape that once seemed so isolating now feels like a sanctuary, a kingdom of their own. Alara hums the simple, tuneless melody that has become their anthem of peace, and she knows, with a certainty that settles deep in her bones, that the desperate old man hadn't just bought a protector for his granddaughter. He had bought Lily a future, and in doing so, he had given one to her, too. Thanks for watching. If you believe in compassion, overcoming prejudice, and finding love in unexpected places, give this story a like and subscribe for more. This story showed love and heroism where least expected. What was your favorite moment of connection between them? Tell us in the comments.